Today we're going to finish off talking about the cord, and then spend most of the time talking about the brain working our way up from the bottom, up the brainstem, up to the top, cerebellum, cerebrum, I don't know how far we'll get, whatever. Of course, this is in your textbook. After we finish the cord bit, there's a chunk of chapter 7 is brainstem, I think, and cerebellum. Obviously, we're not going to go through all that material. I'll touch on some of it. We look at some lesions, some classic lesions, and we just carry our way working up towards the cerebral, top of the brain. Okay, last thing we were talking about was the Brown's required lesion. We've sort of seen this lots of times before, I think, at the very beginning of the class. Remember, that is a hemisection of the cord that cuts, in a pure hemisection, nothing gets up or down past that lesion. Okay? So in other words, I've wiped out some level, let's say T8, whatever. I stab somebody and then cut right through there. And we talked about last time the motor tracts, right? We talked about the corticospinal tract, which comes down here, crosses over the decussation medulla, right? Comes down here, forms the lateral corticospinal tract, and is blocked from going down because of this cut. Some fibers can bypass that lesion. How? Some motor fibers can get around that lesion. How will they do that? Somebody tell me when I pick on somebody.
They don't cross over.
They don't cross over. Where do they cross over?
Sometimes it's nowhere.
Pardon?
It's segmental level.
Yeah, and what's that tract called? Come on. Okay, anterior corticospinal tract, right? The anterior corticospinal tract does this. It does not cross over in the decussation. It does this. Like that, remember? But that's only 15 or so percent. So you're going to have massive problems if you lose 85% of fibers going to this left leg, whatever it is. Okay? So you're going to see what kind of symptoms in this left leg. Upper or lower motor neuron symptoms? Upper or lower? Lower? Anybody say upper? You're right. It's upper. Upper motor neuron symptoms, because these upper motor neurons are not getting down to this. The lower motor neuron sits here, isn't it? That is unaffected. That has not been cut. Would you ever see a patella tendon reflex here in that left leg? Would that be functional? Would it be there? Yes or no? I have cut the motor supply, most of it, to this left leg. Would my lower motor neurons be able to activate their quads by whacking it with a hammer?
Yep.
Of course it would. No problem at all. But it would be hyper-reflexia, wouldn't it? It would be hyper. What kind of paralysis would you have in this left leg? Spastic or flaccid? Spastic, of course. All those upper motor neuron symptoms you would see in that leg, such as what? What else? Give me some classic upper motor neuron symptoms. Clonus, Babinski sign, hyperreflexia, spastic paralysis, all that mess we talked about in that left leg. In the left arm, what kind of paralysis would you see? This lesion is at T8. What kind of paralysis would you see in the left arm? Spastic or flaccid? Nothing. No problems. Relatively no problems. There are some ascending influence, but we'll forget about that. Right leg. What kind of paralysis? Nothing really. You're going to lose 15% of your fibers, aren't you? This 15% of the fibers going to the right leg are going to be lost because of the corticospinal tract coming down here. The anterior corticospinal tract doing this. That's gone. So 50% of the supply to that right leg is gone, but you've got a lot, most of it's still fine. You'd find a slight involvement, but nothing compared to the leg. Right arm fine, of course, same thing. Make sure you know your difference between lower and upper motor neuron symptoms. You're going to guarantee to get questions on that in your board exam. Guaranteed. What is an upper motor neuron disease? What is a lower motor neuron disease? Examples of. Here's MS. Here's Guillain-Barré. Blah, 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 blah. Here's ALS. What symptoms do you see as a result? Is it upper motor neuron or is it lower motor neuron? Think about the symptoms as a result of that. Then we started talking about which branch required. You're going to get sensory loss as well, of course. You've got sensory dissociation problems. You're going to lose some senses, you're not going to, others are going to be fine. Which sensation would I lose from this left leg? Proprioception. Proprioception, remember, comes up ipsilaterally from the leg. Stopped. Can't get up there. Where does that cross over? Medulla. It would normally cross over here, wouldn't it? From the leg, what nucleus does it stop at? What's the name of the nucleus where proprioception stops? The first order neuron stops.
Nucleus bacillus.
Nucleus bacillus. Second order coming over, thalamus, like that. Remember, that's just proprioception from that left leg. Proprioception from the left arm, okay or not? Fine. Proprioception from the right leg, okay or not? Fine. What sensation from the right leg would you lose? Pain and temperature, two sensations. Don't look at pressure and touch, but those are the major ones. You're going to lose that because that crosses over at the segmental level and tries to get up and it can't. So you've lost pain and temperature from your right lower leg. Pain and temperature from the left leg, okay or not? Fine, because that crosses over at segmental level and goes up like this, right? Piece of cake then when you understand what's where. So his left leg is messed up, his left arm is fine. So we know the lesion is between what two levels? Where does it have to be low anyway? Where's the lesion below? Obvious. Think about it. His left arm is perfectly okay. Therefore, the lesion must be below what level? T1, right? T1, you break a plexus, right? Remember that? C4, beta, C4, 5, 6, 7, 8. T1. T1 nerve root's fine. His arm's fine. So he must be below T1 somewhere. Okay? And it has to be above what level? What part of the cord must it be above? Could it be L5? Why not? There is no cord at L5. This is a hemisection of the cord stops where? L2ish somewhere. So we know the lesion must be between roughly T1 and L2, roughly. How can I localize that lesion? How can I say more precisely that it's at, I've told you it's T8, but how would I know it's T8? Give or take a few levels. Well, what is it T8? What are these things here? These stars. These represent our alpha, I think, yeah? Our alpha motor neurons, our lower motor neurons at that segmental level, coming out, going to this muscle of T8. Those would be wiped out because I've slit the cord there. I've damaged the cord at T8. So tell me again then, how could I localize that lesion to T8? What's going to be different at T8 than any other lesion, any other level?
See flaccid paralysis.
Say it again.
Flaccid
paralysis. I have a lower motor neuron problem at T8. I've taken out this section of the cord, I have destroyed those lower motor neurons in the ventral grey horn at one place only. It's a pure one slice. It might be a damage between, T8, T7, T9, whatever. But at that level of the lesion itself, it will be a lower motor neuron problem, won't it? Because the lower motor neurons start within this ventral grey horn here. I've killed them by hacking with a sword, whatever it is. So I can see spastic paralysis below that level, flaccid paralysis at that level and nothing above, roughly. Does that make sense? So wherever you wipe out the lower motor neurons, because I made a cut in the cord at that point, I have destroyed the lower motor neurons at that segmental level, and therefore you're bound to see lower motor neuron symptoms at that level only. I mean, it's sometimes hard, I think T8 it might be hard to localize, but if it was in the arm, it'd be a piece of cake. Look at your myotomes, look at your dermatomes, you can see where the lesion is. Fair enough? So that's a classic brown sequoid lesion. Very commonly you'll see questions on that kind of thing, because it puts lots of pieces of information together. You've got to know 4 or 5 facts, not just one fact. It's not like, what is the innervation of the biceps? Boring. You won't get a question like that. You're getting more involved questions, something like, because you've got 4 or 5 pieces of information within this question. You've got to synthesize that and get the result. Fair enough? Alright, another classic lesion you'll see within the core, last one before we talk about the brainstem, is this top fella here, syringomyelia. Syringomyelia. Syringe means, syrinx is Greek for a tube, so it's a tube-shaped lesion. Myelia is marrow, the center of something, like bone marrow, okay? So it's a tube center, a tube lesion within the center of something. Okay? So what this typically is found, you get cavitation of the grey matter, you get destruction of the grey matter in the center of the cord. Usually it's in the cervical enlargement, in the cervical area. So you look at brachial plexus problems here. So it's represented by this white red hashed mark here, initially. So you get depth destruction, idiopathic. It can be caused by trauma, but it's usually idiopathic, and it's usually found in the elderly. Quite common to be found in the elderly. Okay? So you get this cavitation of the grey matter right round the central canal where the CSF is. And this is in your text. Okay? And it destroys, so it occurs right here. Wipes out this center and this red dot. What's that red dot there representing? The white commissure, right? There we go. Can't really see it there, but it's labeled there. That little bit of material there, right in front of the grey commissure. Lost my mouse. Right here. A little hole, a tube-like hole appears here. Okay? And it goes down a few levels, 2 or 3 segmental levels usually, in the center of the cervical enlargement. It can occur in lumbar enlargement. Therefore, we look at legs, but that's much rarer than the cervical enlargement. Okay? I said it's usually idiopathic. Okay, so what crosses there? If I destroy the anterior white commissure, what are you going to destroy? What are you going to damage? What crosses in that little bit of white stuff? Pain and temperature, right? So you can lose pain and temperature. Ipsilateral or contralaterally? Bilaterally. Bilaterally. Okay? So the classic sign of this is what they'll call a cape-like pattern loss. Like a little cape, sort of a shawl over the top of your arms. Because it will take out, let's say, 4, 5, and 6 perhaps, or 3, 4, and 5, C3, 4, 5, C4, 5, 6, something like this. So you know your dermatomes, don't you? You know your cervical dermatomes, your brachial plexus. So you're going to lose, let's say, 5 and 6. So you're going to lose the top of your shoulders down your arm, a bit like this. Or 4 and 5, maybe. You lose 4 and 5 pain temperature. So you get a bilateral loss of pain and temperature from the top of the shoulders down the arms a bit. That's what they call a cape-like pattern of loss. Very characteristic of this syringomyelia in the early stages of it. Would you have spastic paralysis in the arms? With that central little red chunk there, not the big chunk, this bit here. Initially, this is it, where you'll lose it. Would I have spastic paralysis of the arms? Would I have spastic paralysis of the legs? You've got to know where those tracks are within the core to answer that question. Am I affecting the anterior corticospinal tract? No. Am I affecting the lateral corticospinal tract? No. See, there's going to be no problem, motor problems whatsoever. Okay? In the arms or legs. But, if it gets worse, I'm now going to have this bigger red shaded area, hashed area, die off. So the cavitation gets bigger, and they get a bigger hole, as it were, in the centre of the cervical enlargement. Now what motor symptoms will you see? Anything or nothing?
The lower motor neuron symptoms?
Lower motor neurons are damaged where?
At that level.
At those segmental levels, C4, C5, whatever they are. You can see these stars where my arrow is here. These represent my start of my alpha motor neurons. Okay? And so you'd get what type of paralysis at C4, C5, whatever those levels it attack? Flaccid or spastic? Flaccid, of course, flaccid. Lower motor neuron disease you've just given this person. Would my legs be okay though? Would I have flaccid or spastic paralysis of the legs on that level? On the left hand side in this case. The major one, is my lateral corticospinal tract affected? No. Here's my lateral corticospinal tract. Here's my anterior, what they call, yeah. Media could have, but same thing. Anterior corticospinal tract down here. These are fine. So my motor pathways to my legs and the rest of the body are fine. I've just wiped out the lower motor neuron at that segmental level. So the lost pain and temperature. Proprioception is what affected? In bilaterally, what effect is this disease on proprioception? What effect is this on proprioception? At that level. Piece of cake, it says, come on, let's get on to more important stuff. Harder. This is easy. Where does your proprioception go up? Where does it come in? Dorsal roots, right? Where does it go up? What columns does it go up? Dorsal columns, right? Here. Is that affected? No. Proprioception is not affected at all. It's just this pain and temperature. Now don't be shy, you know this answer. It's obvious. There's proprioception, comes in. Only pain and temperature is the issue here in syringomyelia. If it gets worse, you can get weird symptoms when the pressure of the cerebrospinal fluid in that central canal bulges out and get a weird set of symptoms going on, but you might get many things happening. But the classic sign is cape-like loss of pain and temperature within the upper cervical dermatomes. You must know your dermatomes, obviously. I could ask, or a board's question would ask you, a patient loses sensation here, and pain. You touch the shoulders, no pain. You touch no pain on the left shoulder. Left proprioception of the shoulder is fine. Later on, the patient presents with flaccid paralysis of the deltoid, bilaterally. Those all would point you towards syringomyelia. Little old lady who's got this pattern of symptoms, you think syringomyelia. They'll give you, is it syringomyelia, is it Brown-Séquard, is it ALS, is it blah, 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 blah. You've got to know the pattern of signs and symptoms associated with syringomyelia. Fair enough? Questions? You know your neuroanatomy. You can figure it out quite easy. You've got to know what goes where within the cord. Speaking of which, last thing before we go into the brainstem. The cord is supplied by 3 arteries in terms of blood supply. we have one anterior spinal artery right at the very front here. Okay, and that splits out and it supplies this red area on both sides. I'll just hatch it up on one side. So that's roughly the territory of the anterior spinal artery on both sides. You can see how it contains a lot of this. Here's the anterior grey horn, etc., etc. As opposed to the back of the cord are supplied by two arteries. The posterior spinal artery. You're going to right and the left one here. And they supply primarily the dorsal columns. The dorsal white columns here. The right and left supply. So you've got there, of course, your fasciculus cuneatus and fasciculus gracilis. So if you lose a specific artery, you can lose a specific part of the cord. Okay? So if I lost, if I have a hemorrhage of my left posterior spinal artery at T9, what symptoms would the patient present with? So I have a thrombus or a complete bleed out, whatever, ischemia of my left posterior spinal artery. I said, yeah, T9. I said, whatever. Give me signs and symptoms of that lesion. Loss of proprioception from where? Ipsilaterally, what level? My lesion was not T9, so where would the loss be from? Anything below T9, right? Legs, primarily. That's when you. So what would the patient present with? Say, I come in and say, I've lost proprioception from T9 below. What's wrong with me? What would they probably present with? Maybe gait ataxia. They don't know where the left leg is in space. Yeah, probably have ataxia of that left leg because they need to know where my left leg is to be able to walk properly. If you don't have proprioception of the legs, you're going to get ataxia. They might look at their legs when they're walking. Okay, next, moving on. Any questions about the cord? Read the chapter, it's all in there. Alright. Quick overview of the brain. Okay? I'm going to come back and touch on some of these areas later, but let's just go quick refresher of the brain. About 2.5% of our body weight, but it uses 25% of oxygen. Remember, brain tissue, as in all the neural tissue, cannot handle living without oxygen. It will die very quickly. That's why stroke is permanent. If you deprive the oxygen with ischemia or hemorrhagic stroke, that brain tissue is going to die very quickly, and it won't regrow back. Why not? Why can't I regrow some more motor cortex? Because there's no mitotic apparatus in those brain cells. You cannot reproduce brain cells, except in one place, which is where? Olfactory, yeah. We'll come back to the olfactory nerve. Okay, this is a big dome shape. What we're going to do is we're going to go evolution terms and up from top to bottom, basically. These are the divisions of the neural tube. Have you done neural development in any class? Life cycles? I haven't got time to go over it, but basically the brain starts off with a tube. It's called the neural tube. A big pipe. Okay? And what happens, it folds around and curves and bubbles appear in this tube, whatever. And you get the brain as we know. But these names come from divisions of the neural tube. Simple as that. I'm not going to go over any more detail of the neural tube than that. But, so these names come out of that development of the brain from the fetal life. the most advanced part. Telo means the end. So the telencephalon is the last part of the brain, the last part of this tube, basically. Okay? This is the most advanced part of the brain, the cerebrum and the basal ganglia. Cerebral cortex is the most advanced part of the brain. Remember, neural development occurs caudal to rostrally. What does rostral mean? Towards the beak, towards the nose. So that's the most advanced part. The latest development of the brain is the frontal cortex, the frontal lobe. Okay? The diencephalon, di means across, like diameter. Does that help you remember that? No, whatever. Thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus. We'll come to this in a minute. The metaencephalon is lower down. This is the set comprised of cerebellum and the pons. Metaencephalon is meta means boundary. Yeah. Mesencephalon, another part again of the neural tube. I don't use these terminologies much, but you never know when you might see them. Meso means middle, so this is another term for the midbrain. You'll hear the midbrain commonly. You won't hear mesencephalon much, I don't think. You'll hear diencephalon to use a lot. Yeah, I don't know about the rest. The midbrain comprises of two big structures, the cerebral peduncles and the corpora quadrigemina. Peduncle means what? If you ever see, there's lots of peduncles around the brain. So just sort of a tip. Peduncle means a stalk, a junction, a big pathway of neural fibers connecting something to something else. So it's a big stalk between two areas of the brain, right? So when you see that term peduncle, that's what it means, a connection pathway between two things. Okay? Corpora means what? Body. Quadrigemina, four things. Four-thing body. There's four lumps there. We'll get to that in a minute. And the myelencephalon is the medulla or medulla oblongata. Usually just call it medulla. So those are the five classic divisions of the neural tube. We're going to go up, bottom to top. We'll go through these things. The brainstem, you must have heard, is not technically a division of the neural tube, but it's part of those, and we'll use this term way more often. That's medulla, pons, and midbrain. You've heard those terms before, yes? You've gone through the lobes and parts of the brain A and P. So this is nothing new, hopefully, this bit anyway. Okay? Alright. Brainstem. This is obviously the stalk that connects the cerebrum, the top part of the brain, with the cord. So it's basically an extension, a fattening of the cord. All the tracks we've mentioned in the cord go through the brainstem, obviously to get up to the brain or down from the brain. Okay? Lesions in the brainstem can be pretty serious. A lot of our vegetative functions that keep us ticking over are found within the brainstem. If you lose a brainstem, a big lesion in the brainstem, you're pretty much dead. Okay, you're toast if you lose that. I can lose my cerebral cortex quite well. I won't be well, but I can have no cognition and my heart rate can carry on fine. You can, that's what you tell, the sort of about, a vegetable, as it were. I can cut the top of my cortex off completely, and as long as my brainstem is fine, I can just tick over. Okay? Unfortunately, for some reason, the brainstem neural cells are more resistant to O2 loss than the higher centers. So they can handle loss of oxygen for some reason a little bit longer than the big cognitive centers higher up. But if you lose the brainstem, you're in a mess. Okay? You won't live. You can have smaller lesions in the brainstem. You have small focal lesions in the brainstem. And the signs and symptoms you'll see, of course, are related to the neuroanatomy of that region. And it's important to remember that 12 pairs of cranial nerves basically start within the brainstem, come out of the brainstem. And the brainstem, remember, from bottom to top is medulla, pons, midbrain. And basically the last four of our cranial nerves, so that's 12, come out of out of medulla. The next 4, the middle 4, come out of the pons. And the top 4 basically sort of come out of the midbrain. Okay, so you just must remember the names of these cranial nerves, what they do, and if I have a lesion at a certain level in the brain, I'm unlikely to affect a certain cranial nerve, and you'll see symptoms of that. So, do you know your cranial nerves? We're going to end it, we're going to go through each one in quite detail later on, but do you know basically the function of your 12 cranial nerves? Roughly what each one of them do? No? Did you do A&P? You must have done it, but you got it. An old Olympus towering top of Finn and Jim and viewed a house. That's what I was taught in high school. It's kind of an old one now. I still remember from high school because it's just stupid. Or, ooh, touch and fit. I want to tell that one. There's some really rude ones, and those you remember those better perhaps. But if you go online, you've 100 mnemonics remembering all these kind of things. But there's 12 cranial nerves, right? On old Olympus towering top of Finn and German viewed a house, and that's changed slightly because let's quickly name them, and then we'll go very quickly. I'll give you 2 seconds spiel on each one, just so we know what we're looking at here. Just if you refresh it from your A&P. The top one is olfactory. Okay, the olfactory nerve. Obviously, what does that do? Smell. Motor, any motor component. When I twitch my nose, is that my olfactory nerve working? No. Olfactory nerve is pure sensory. In fact, what you can see there is not the nerve. This is the olfactory tract. This is, in fact, here. The actual nerve is right in here. We'll talk about later. But that stalk is actually an extension of the brain itself. So it's not really the nerve. But whatever. We'll talk about when we get to the olfactory nerve. Optic nerve. Sensory motor mixed. Which is it? Pure sensory. Sight, right? Obviously, sight. When I move my eyes, it's not the optic nerve doing it. Ocular motor, number 3. You should know your names, you should know the Roman numerals or a number that these correspond to. People will say ocular nerve 3, other people might say ocular motor nerve. Okay? Notice there's only one C in it. People make that mistake of putting 2 C's in ocular motor. There's 1 C in it. Ocular motor. Any idea? Yeah? What does it do? Eyeball movement. Eyeball movement. It controls 4 muscles of the eye. Extrinsic muscles of the eye that go around the eyeball. How many muscles are there that control? How many extrinsic muscles of the eyeball are there? There's 6. There's 6. We'll go over these when we look at the ocular motor. But there's 6 muscles that sort of all come out like this and connect around the tops and bottoms of the eyeball and rotate it up and down and whatever. Okay? The ocular motor controls 4 of those. Okay? Anything else it controls? The pupil and the lens. So it controls the diameter of the pupil and changing the shape of the lens for focusing on accommodation if something comes towards you to read, whatever. Okay? So it controls, there are parasympathetic fibers within that. What do you mean by that? So there's pure motor nerves going to our cranium, going to those muscles around the eye, just like normal skeletal nerve muscles, whatever. But there are parasympathetic fibers going along this cranial nerve to the eyeball. What do you think they do? Why are we going to send parasympathetic nerve fibers to the eyeball? Huh?
Tear off.
So what?
The tear right here.
Tears? No, that's a facial nerve. Good attempt. What happens to your pupils when you're scared stiff? They dilate, right? Does a parasympathetic do that or sympathetic?
Sympathetic.
Sympathetic. Your pupils dilate when you're scared or you're doing a hard exam or whatever in cognition. So what the parasympathetic fibers do is shut the eyeball down. There's a fight, of course, between sympathetic and parasympathetic. They're continually battling to control the eyeball, the pupil. Parasympathetic fibers shut the eyeball down in terms of the pupil. They make the pinpoint pupils. And look at lesions that will do this to us later on. Okay? So the oculomotor nerve controls the movement of the eye and the pupil and the lens. What else? Trochlea. An old Olympus towering top. Trochlea. Number 4. One little muscle called the superior oblique, which is a little muscle that moves the eyeball. 6 muscles that move the eye. Oculomotor does 4 of them. Trochlea does 1. One little muscle. The superior oblique muscle, which, amongst other things, points the eyeball down. Down and in a bit kind of thing. So glancing, if I look down, use my eyeball to look down at the feet, that probably superior oblique's doing that for me. Trigeminal, a big one. What have you been taught about the trigeminal? Have you done these in A&P? Yes, you have, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah. You've gone over them, yes? People went to Husson? No? Yes, okay. You obviously didn't do a lot on them, but you should know the names and what they do. What does a trigeminal nerve do? 2 major functions. Chewing muscles, the muscles for chewing, moving your jaw up and down, mainly up. And probably another very important thing, face sensation. All my touch, pressure, pain, temperature, vibration, whatever, of my facial area is trigeminal nerve, not the facial nerve. 6, abducens. Abducens is again one little nerve that goes to one muscle of the eyeball. It's the other last nerve that goes to the eyeball. Abducens goes to the lateral rectus muscle, which of course abducts. Abducens, think of abducts the eye, pointed outwards, looks laterally. The abducens nerve, one muscle. You're all familiar with the concept of unopposed action, yes? So if I lose the abducen nerve in my right side, what symptoms would the patient present with? Or sign, whatever, sign symptoms the patient would present with. I've lost my right abducens nerve. What would the patient look like? The right eye would be pointing inwards. You'd have a medial squint, or medial strabismus. Have you heard the term strabismus? Medial strabismus. So the eye, that right eye will be pointing inwards because the medial rectus, which is controlled by the oculomotor nerve, is fine. The lateral rectus, controlled by the abducens, is not fine. Therefore, the eye drifts inwards. Okay? You see this unopposed action. Facial nerve, a very big one. Facial nerve, what does that do? What have you heard about that one? All the facial expression, all the muscles of the face, except for those 4 that chew, you're looking at facial nerve. Squinting your eyes, curling your nose, smiling, frowning, whatever. All those facial expression muscles are facial nerve. What else? There's a big sensory, big but important sensory component. Taste. Anterior 2/3 of the tongue, taste buds, facial nerve. On old limbs towering top A, so this nerve has changed. You'll see this nerve as various terminologies, but probably the most common term for cranial nerve 8 is your vestibulocochlear nerve. What's it called here? Yeah, vestibulocochlear. In high school we called it the acoustic nerve. Whatever. Sound. Sometimes you'll hear it called statoacoustic. But the vestibulocochlear nerve comes obviously from the vestibular system and the cochlea. So you've got balance, the semicircular canals, right? Semicircular canals and your otolith organs. You've heard of those, right? And sound. So head movement and sound is a vestibulocochlear nerve. Glossopharyngeal. Number 9. Glossopharyngeal. Glossus means, is here at the dentist, tongue. Glossopharyngeal, throat. So posterior third of the tongue, taste. Anterior 2/3 of the tongue, facial. Posterior glossopharyngeal. So the taste in the back of your tongue. And throat muscles. And it's another important function as well. We'll come back to it obviously and go over in detail and look at lesions. The vagal, of course, is our big, very important autonomic nerve that comes out and goes down, paired, going down to all the heart, lungs, whatever. All the organs of the thorax and upper abdomen are going to be vagal nerve. Is that going to, the vagal nerve, will that increase heart rate or decrease heart rate? If I increase the firing of my vagal nerve, will I increase my heart rate or decrease my heart rate? Well, that's something you should want to be aware. Well, I've got one vote for decrease. One brave soul has said decrease. Well, is the vagal nerve parasympathetic or sympathetic? No. It's parasympathetic, right? It's parasympathetic. Remember, your parasympathetic supply comes out of your cranial nerves and some lower sacral nerves. Your sympathetic supply comes out of the core. The parasympathetic supply, for example, in the oculomotor nerve, in the vagal nerve, is parasympathetic. What does a parasympathetic system do to the heart? Slow it down or speed it up? Slow it down. Slow it down. Okay? So we'll come back to that one, obviously. Accessory is the first nerve you found in your dissection, right? Hopefully some of you found it. Where was it? Traps and SCM. Stereophagomuscular. So that's a nerve that sort of comes out the head a little bit, but not far, down to the neck. And last one, number 12, hypoglossal, means hypo, beneath, glossus, tongue movement. The muscles of the tongue are supplied by a hypoglossal nerve. Okay, so you should, that's a very brief, quick, dirty overview of what those cranial nerves do. There's lots more intricate details, and we'll get to those. We'll look at our cranial nerves after we go to the brain. Okay, let's move on to the brainstem itself. Remember, our bottom 4 are going to come out of the medulla, and the next 4 out of the pons, and the next 4 higher up. Apart from olfactory, it's not really a nerve there. So we've got these top to bottom divisions: medulla, pons, midbrain. But we also have a front to back divisions of the brainstem. We have the basis on the front side, anterior, the tegmentum, middle, and tectum at the back. Okay, basis on the anterior part, anterior longitudinal part of the brainstem. The tegmentum is at the middle of it, and the back side is a tectum. What extrapyramidal pathways start on the very back of the brainstem? What are your 4 major, it's more than this, but 4 biggest extrapyramidal pathways called? Reticulospinal, rubospinal, vestibulospinal, and tectospinal. Tectospinal. That's where we start in here. Let's look at what goes on with each part of the brainstem. So, the bottom part, medulla, medulla oblongata, whatever you want to call it. Last 4 cranial nerves come out of, arise, so the nuclei where they start, the cell bodies of these neurons are going to start within this area within the medulla. So, for example, the glossopharyngeal, vagal, accessory, hypoglossal. They all start within the medulla. So damage to the medulla might damage one or all four of those cranial nerves. It's about an inch long, this thing is. And the dissection later on in the 6th year, or on OT they've got this out now, you can maybe go and look at that. This is the medulla, very bottom part. And what you'll see on the medulla, on the anterior portion, is two big thick swellings, two columns going down the anterior side of the medulla. Okay? Those are called the pyramids of medulla. You can see it labelled here. There's big columns of fibres coming down the front side, the tracks coming down the front side of the medulla. And if you look carefully, those columns, there's a little crosshatch between them, but they're linked. That sort of two columns blend together in one place. Here. Okay, see on that. The decussation of the pyramids of medulla. The decussation. Decussation, deca, 10 in Roman numerals, cross. What happens there? The decussation of the pyramids of medulla. What happens there? This is where our lateral corticospinal tract crosses to get to the side. That crossing, is where those pathways cross. You can see it's on the bottom of the medulla. Okay? What else crosses there? What else do you find? We mentioned so far. What else do you find in the medulla? The bottom of the medulla. What's that green dot? Nucleus cunatus and our nucleus gracilis. This is where we find those ending of the first order neuron of the proprioceptive fibers. That's where they end. Okay, so we find that in the caudal medulla too. Okay? We also see the inferior cerebellar peduncle here. And it's shown here somewhere. The inferior cerebellar peduncle. What's a peduncle? A thing that connects two parts of the brain together. This peduncles, we have three pairs of peduncles. Cerebellar peduncles. They are pathways that glue, attach the brainstem to the cerebellum behind it. The cerebellum sits behind the brainstem. And there's three pairs of stalks connect the cerebellum to the brainstem. Inferior, middle, and superior peduncles. The inferior cerebellar peduncle comes off the medulla and goes to cerebellum. The middle is by far the largest. We'll get to that in a sec. We'll come back to these terms and why they're important in a minute. Inferior cerebellar peduncle. Okay, probably the most important thing about the medulla is that it has major reflex centers in it. Autonomic, low-level vegetative functions of the body are housed here. So, for example, we have the cardiac center. There's a cardiac center within the medulla. This regulates the rate and strength of the heart. Okay, cardiac center. That's damaged, you're dead. Okay, we're in a mess anyway. We have, there's another reflex center called the medullary rhythmicity center. Okay, or you probably more often call it the respiratory center. Or, how do you pronounce it? Respiratory? Respiratory. Whatever. Respiratory center, whatever. Respiratory center is how you're supposed to pronounce it. What's that going to do? Breathing, obviously. Rate, strength, breathing. And the last important one, well, other ones, but another really important one is the vasomotor center. The vasomotor center. What's that going to do for you?
It controls for artery constriction?
Blood vessel diameter. Blood vessel diameter, yeah. So the amount of dilation or constriction of a blood vessel is going to be a function of the vasomotor center. Largely sympathetic supply, of course. Remember, the Well, forget that. There were other centres like somebody lower that, like coughing, sneezing, gagging, swallowing. Those very low-level reflex kind of functions that are found within the medulla. But again, damage the medulla. Think what cranial nerves start here. What symptoms will you see? And we'll go over some classic lesions in a minute of the brainstem. Pons above the medulla. Next part upwards. Pons means what? I think pontoon and bridge. It's bridging. It basically bridges between, obviously, the midbrain above and the medulla below, but primarily it's the bridge between the brainstem and the cerebellum. Because the middle cerebellar peduncle is here. The middle cerebellar peduncle is the biggest one. That contains the most fibers going to the cerebellum. We have arising out of the pons the next four cranial nerves. So you've got your trigeminal, you have Husson's, your vestibulocochlear and your facial nerve, all found coming out of the pons. The nuclei are within the pons and those nerves come out. The fourth ventricle is directly behind the pons. It separates, the fourth ventricle sits in here, and this separates the brainstem from the cerebellum. Let's come back to a minute. Above there, the midbrain. The midbrain is the next part up. Okay, which joins the pons with the part of the brain above there, which is the diencephalon. So it's the next sort of part up, as it were. There's, I said there's two major structures you'll see here in your dissection. Well, now, here we go. Okay? On the front side, the anterior side, you see these big columns here. They're known as the cerebral crus, C-R-U-S, or probably more commonly, cerebral peduncles. Not cerebellum, that's cerebral peduncles. Big fiber pathways going up into the brain. On the back side of this midbrain, you see these four lumps, two pairs. This is that corpora quadrigemina mentioned. Okay, very distinct. The top two lumps are called the superior colliculi. The superior colliculi. The bottom are the inferior colliculi. The superior colliculi control our reflexes to light. Light-mediated reflexes. So when my hands come in front of my face, there's a light, something startles me, I flinch, I close my eyes, I blink. That's all via the superior colliculi. Okay? Or you shine a light in somebody's eye. What happens to if I shine a light in somebody's right pupil only, what do you expect to see? The right pupil constricts, left pupil does what? Constricts a little bit. Not as much as this one. It's called the consensual light reflex. The other one should shut down too, but not as much as this other one, the one you shine light into. And that's a function of superior colliculi. And which nerve was doing that for you? I just told you 5 minutes ago.
Oculomotor.
Oculomotor. The oculomotor shuts down the pupil. Why does the doctor shine a light in your eye? To see what? Damage to what? The oculomotor nerve? Lens, retina? You could do that, but not normally. Somebody's had a head trauma, banged their head. And a car accident. Why do you first shine a light in a pupil? Why do you shine a light in the eye? You don't really care if the lens is damaged. I mean, sure, it's important, but they'll be blind, but it's not going to kill them. You lose your ocular motor nerve. Yeah, whatever. You're not going to die from that. What will you die from?
A stroke in the midbrain?
Stroke in the midbrain,
Oh.
yeah. That would kill you, yeah. But it's not the reason here. Because of cerebral herniation. Bleeding. You bang your head against the wall, you have a car crash, you'll affect, for example, the middle meningeal artery might get cut, very common. Blood gradually pulls down the brain, drifts down, and starts pressing on, right at the bottom there, it presses on the brainstem. So, a unreactive pupil is bad news. Can be sign. There's other things that can cause that. Hopefully it's just your oculomotor nerves damaged, or a person on drugs, something like that. That will do that to you. But if you've had head trauma and you've got unreactive pupil, that's a pretty serious medical emergency. It means, more often than not, you have cerebral herniation. You've got pressure on the brain stem, and this is where your oculomotor nerve comes out of. If you do not and your superior grid line. If you do not get normal reactions to light, it could be a sign of serious damage. If you've got pressure on the brainstem, you're going to die pretty quickly. So that's a medical emergency if you've got that kind of issue. And it's a superior clip that does that for you. This is not sight, this is visual reflexes. And what is the pathway that signals my arms come on my face if I see a visual, something flashing in my face? What's that pathway? It gets my arms in front of my face, gets my head back. Tectospinal, right? Tectospinal, tectum. This is what we're talking about here. It's not, I don't say, oh, I see somebody's fist coming towards my face, let me think about that, I better duck. No, it's the superior clip that does that non-consciously, before you even know it. Same thing for the inferior colliculi. That's sound reflexes. Reflexes to sound. Loud bang goes off and you jump backwards. It's a superior collicular, the inferior colliculi has done that to you via tectospinal tract. Okay? What else in here? The red nucleus is found within the midbrain. The red nucleus. The red nucleus is the start of what tract? Rubrospinal tract. The rubrospinal tract. And the red nucleus is a very important link, relay station, processing center, whatever you want to call it, between the cerebellum and the cerebrum, and the cerebellum and the core. So you want to make quick, rapid movement or adjustments. So what does the cerebellum do? Two things. What have you heard about the cerebellum? What does it do for you?
It compares.
Compares and contrasts the air, comparative center. What else? If I damage your cerebellum, do you have paralysis? No. If I damage cerebrum, you have paralysis. Damage cerebellum, what do you see? What does the cerebellum do for us besides the comparative center? It regulates muscle tone, posture, balance, these low-level synergies, these low-level coordination things. You damage cerebellum, you've got ataxia. You damage this red nucleus, you damage the rubrospinal tract, because the red nucleus is gone, you're going to probably see ataxia. Cerebellar symptoms. And not paralysis, but movement coordination problems. Very important, regulating muscle tone. Okay, last thing about the midbrain. What's this little thing here? Look, the nerve that comes out right beneath the inferior colliculi. Trochlear nerve. We'll come back why it's important. What does trochlear nerve do? Superior oblique muscle. Point the eye downwards. Just remember that. We're going to come back to a damage this in a minute. And the very last thing to note, just on this diagram, it's not part of the midbrain, but this little bulb here, this little swelling here, is a pineal gland, or pineal body. We're going to come back to that in a minute. So just remember where that is. It sits right above the superior colliculi, the pineal body, pineal gland, whatever you want to call it. Okay, let's damage this now. We're going to talk about a few classic lesions of the midbrain, of the brainstem, due to mini strokes, vascular supply. And your symptoms are going to be related to what part of the brainstem is damaged and what cranial nerves start there. This is your first one. Very classic questions they'll ask on this. Wallenberg syndrome. Wallenberg, which is this grey splodge here. Wallenberg syndrome. This is a lesion of a dorsal lateral section of the rostral medulla. Dorsal lateral, back side, rostral, high up within the medulla, towards the top as it were. And usually this lesion, very commonly, is caused by this blue fella here, which is a pica. Posterior, inferior, cerebellar artery stroke. I'll get a better picture, I think. This one here. Let's get a better. I've got one more somewhere, I think. Is that a netted? So it's this blue I could have dotted it on here. This posterior, inferior, cerebellar artery. Okay? Its job, of course, is it goes to the posterior, inferior cerebellum. But on the way to that part of the brain, it goes across the medulla here and supplies little branches, little tributaries come off and supply the medulla. Are you familiar with the arteries that go to the brain or not? You've got your two vertebral arteries, right? And two internal carotids. Very quickly, we're going to talk about cerebral blood flow later, but your two vertebral arteries come up the brainstem, the bottom of the brainstem. These two black lines down here, and they form one basilar artery. It goes right along the front of the brainstem. It's a very important supply to the brain. The internal carotids are shown there, but talk about that. But basically, your vertebral arteries supply the brainstem. Okay, and tributaries of the vertebral artery. So we need to know for now. So damage to vertebral arteries, you're looking at brainstem issues. You're looking at cranial nerve issues. And this issue here is Wallenberg. So little perforating arteries, as that pica, posterior inferior cerebral artery, winds around itself and around the brainstem, it gives off little tributaries that go into the brainstem, into the medulla. And what happens is, you've got chunks of fat, clots, whatever, coming off the heart, going up these big pipes, these big vertebral arteries. And they get siphoned off, blood flows into little minute tributaries coming away from those big pipes. So this medium chunk of fat, plaque, whatever, comes up that big pipe, fine, rattles around it. Then it gets sucked into one of those little minute tributaries, and then it clogs it. Like a sieve, it stops, and it clogs that little artery going to the medulla. Okay? And that's what you get, Wallenberg syndrome. So what you get with Wallenberg syndrome, look what's shaded out in grey there. You've got this ischemia in this part of the brainstem. What you're going to generally see in any of these cranial nerve, these brainstem issues, you're going to have a contralateral loss of sensation in the body, but ipsilateral loss in the face. Okay? So let's look at that. Loss of pain and temperature contralaterally. Why? Where does pain and temperature cross over? Where within the cord of the brainstem does your fibers for pain and temperature cross from one side of the body to the other?
Like on sir.
Segmental level, right? Segmental level. Comes in and crosses immediately. So what we've got here, you can see in yellow the lateral spinal thalamic tract on the left-hand side. That has come from the right-hand side of the body, hasn't it? So you're going to lose pain and temperature contralateral to the lesion, aren't you? That makes sense? But you're going to lose loss of sensation ipsilateral face, because you can see, you can't see that word here. Yes, it's not shown on the left, but here, spinal tract nucleus, that purple dot I've drawn is the trigeminal nuclei. That is the ending, that's equivalent to the dorsal grey horn of the cord. My pain fibers, my proprioceptive fibers, my touch fibers, everything from the right-hand side of my face ends up in that purple dot. This is the nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. So you lose, in this case, you would lose right face, left body with that lesion, wouldn't you? Very characteristic of Wallenberg syndrome. You also might see, because the inferior cerebellar peduncle is affected, you might see ataxia. Cerebellar damage, ataxia, the other characteristic of that would be hypotonia. Hypotonia. Cerebral damage, hyper. Cerebellar usually is hypotonia. Vagal nerve starts here. So you might have autonomic issues. Okay? And the vestibular nuclei are found, and the lower vestibular nuclei are found here. So you might see nystagmus. Have you heard the term nystagmus? Yes, no? Nystagmus? Nystagmus is what? Twitching in the eyeballs. Eyeballs twitch. Because you damage the vestibular nuclei. But those are all characteristic of Wallenberg syndrome, but probably the most characteristic deficit you'll see in an exam question. Look out for contralateral sensation loss, pain, temperature, ipsilateral face, posterior inferior cerebellar damage, artery damage, Wallenberg's. I saw, not that one, but I saw the next one, an exam question on the board, Weber's syndrome. Bottom right-hand corner on this graph, on this figure here. This is Weber's syndrome. That loss of the brainstem there. And this is often due to a lesion, a ischemia within this artery. Blowing out. The posterior cerebral artery. Up here, the posterior cerebral artery goes to the back of the cerebrum. But on the way, it supplies this part of the brainstem. Okay. I've got a left one here. I've got my left posterior cerebral artery stroke. Destroyed that left hashed area. Right hashed area. Weber syndrome. Give me symptoms, you'll see. What is in that number one little circle? Look on the left hand side and the right hand side. What is in number one you can damage? Okay, oculomotor, that yellow line, oculomotor nerve. I've damaged my right oculomotor nerve. What would you see then? Do it again. Different pupil sizes, yes. Would it be reactive to light? No. That you'd have problems with the pupil. It would be dilated. It would be permanently dilated. It would not shut down to light because the oculomotor nerve going to it is gone. What about the eyeball itself? What would it look like? Think about unopposed action. One of the muscles that's innervated by this nerve is the medial rectus, which is this muscle in the middle of the eye, which points your eyes inwards, right? So what would you see with this eyeball if you damage that muscle or damage that nerve? It goes outwards. What muscle turns it outwards? Lateral rectus. What nerve goes to that? What abducts the eye? Abducens. Abducens nerve is fine. The oculomotor nerve is not fine. So the eye would go outwards. You would have an external strabismus or a lateral strabismus of that one eye. So you'd have oculomotor palsy. You might also see ptosis as well, very typically. What's ptosis? You've heard that term? Ptosis? The eyelid drops. You get drooping eyelid on that one side because the levator palpebral, a muscle we'll talk about later, is innervated by the oculomotor nerve. So your eyeball, your pupil will drop. Last thing, what else would you get? Come on, you've missed the most important thing. What are you going to be more concerned about if you're a patient? What's that left-hand side of the diagram there? Showing, what's that? What the heck's this? Here. The corticospinal tract is shot. So what symptoms would they present with? This is on the right side, okay? So what do they present with? Spastic or flaccid paralysis? Is this an upper motor neuron problem or a lower motor neuron problem? Upper motor neuron problem. Therefore it's what? Spastic paralysis, clonus, blah blah blah, Hoffman, Bavinsky. And would it be ipsilateral or contralateral to the lesion? This is the patient's right side. Would it be ipsilateral or contralateral?
Contralateral.
I've got one vote for contralateral. I've got 80 votes for no idea. Well, I haven't got the nerve to say. Where did the corticospinal tract cross over? Medulla. Is this above or below the medulla?
Above.
This is in where are we now? We're in the midbrain here, right? It's above the medulla? Of course it is. Therefore, those fibers coming down the right-hand side are killed, are destined to go where? Left or right? Left. All those ones in number 1 are about to cross over a few inches down the depreciation period of the medulla, right? So you're going to have a contralateral hemiplegia, aren't you? Contralateral paralysis, contralateral blah 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 blah. That makes sense? We'll talk about Benedict's and Parano's later. You've got to know your neuroanatomy, where things are, know the function of those things, and then you've got your signs and symptoms.